So God talk is this term that my co-author Paul Jupe and I came up with to describe how candidates go about appealing to evangelical constituencies. Because one of the big challenges for Republicans, and you'll see this year as we are in the primary season, is for Republicans to go from being very explicit about their religious viewpoints or their identity, or how they want to try to appeal to evangelicals, Catholics, Jews, whomever it happens to be, that they have to kind of position themselves to the right in making these very explicit kinds of statements about, like George W. Bush did in 1999, calling Christ his favorite philosopher. Bill Clinton would even read from the Bible during his presidency. So these are things that people sometimes maybe miss, but if you think about it, there are these explicit cues that go on. In the course of a campaign, though, that can be a problem for candidates because there's a group of voters out there who may be very religious themselves, but who are uncomfortable with candidates making these overt religious appeals. And so evangelical voters, being a very important part of the Republican constituency, they're not going to be able to win an election on their own for any candidate. They're just not a large enough percentage of the population. So a Republican candidate especially will have to go from making these more explicit appeals, maybe like you're seeing right now in the Republican primary elections, to being more of a moderate. Right? This is the standard conventional wisdom of how to win a political campaign in the U.S. One of the strategies that Republicans have had at their disposal over the past several years has been something that was revealed by a Republican strategist back in 2006. And basically it was this revelation of code language, if you will, that Republican candidates could insert into speeches that would mean something really important and very specific to evangelical listeners, but would not go detected, if you will, or would be undetected by other voting groups, whether they be Catholics, mainline Protestants, or folks who are not even Christian, really. So this God talk, if you will, is a term that we gave this language, and one of the phrases from this is really amazing. It's the following quote: "We have this land, and we're told to be good stewards of it and each other." That's an actual verbatim quote of God talk. It's great because stewardship and being a steward, these are all important types of terms and concepts in evangelical Christianity, but the actual terms themselves don't sound like they're overtly religious. So when you have a candidate that goes out and says, we have this land and we're told to be good stewards of it and each other, you don't get a lot of people on the other side saying, that candidate is trying to be religious, trying to appeal to evangelicals. So my colleague and I decided we were going to try to actually test this, because it's great to have these operatives write books and things and say this is what we've done to make ourselves successful, but there's never really been much of a scientific assessment of a lot of these claims. And so what we're doing in the process of all this work is to try to put together some type of test of these claims that go on. And we were able to find that over and above any type of party ID that a candidate has, there is a very strong positive effect that the God talk language has among evangelical listeners or perceivers. And even more importantly, for the God talk practitioners, if you will, there's not any type of notice by non-evangelical listeners. They're not necessarily more enthused, but they're not less enthused. They're just not really picking up on the language, which just shows you how ingenious the idea really is. And whether or not it gets used in 2012, I think will come down to how things play out after the primary elections. You're not going to hear a lot of this in the primary elections, because the idea with Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum, those folks, is to be as explicit as possible, because a lot of the primary voters in the Republican Party are going to be evangelicals. They're going to want to hear a more explicit type of cue from their candidates. But when the candidate, say the nominee is going to be Mitt Romney, for argument's sake, he's going to have to, at some point, pivot from making explicit appeals to evangelicals who, by the way, don't necessarily trust him, if you've been following a lot of the stories about what's going on here in recent politics in recent days. But they at least will go with him, potentially, if he's the nominee. He's going to have to find a way to appeal to them and look more moderate to non-evangelicals. So God talk could actually be a very important type of tool in his campaign toolbox later this year.